Good morning and welcome. In We are commencing India Economic Conclave, decoding $5 trillion, the roadmap for Indian economy. We have very eminent guest speakers with us. We would request Mr. Abraham Stefanos, President, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Managing Director, Tata Steel Downstream Products Limited, to kindly deliver the welcome address. Over to Mr. Stefanos, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of today at the fourth edition of Bengal Chamber's India Economic Conclave, decoding 5 trillion, the roadmap for the Indian economy. At the outset, I must thank and also extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the guest speakers at this conclave who have kindly consented to join us today, despite the busy schedules. I am sure their professional experience and expertise will add tremendous value to the deliberations. India, being one of the fastest growing major economies and currently being ranked as the world's sixth largest economy, has projections of solid growth that are quite encouraging and optimistic. The underlying strengths are indicative of the potential of India to achieve a $5 trillion economy by 2025. The current structure of the economy and the emerging dynamics provide us grounds to target achieving $1 trillion from agriculture and allied activities, another $1 trillion from manufacturing, and $3 trillion from services. But unfortunately, the Indian economy is facing many hurdles, especially after the slowdown in economic activity due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Although disruption in the Indian economy during the second and third wave of COVID was limited compared to the first, however, if estimates are to be taken into account, economic recovery in several sectors has been unequal. On one hand, sectors like manufacturing and construction recovered steadily in 2021. On the other hand, low-skilled jobs performed by individuals, women, self-employed people, and small firms were left behind. Nevertheless, the pandemic has brought India's manufacturing skill to the fore. Amid the COVID-19 crisis, India became the largest producer of personal protective equipment, which is a testimony to the country's manufacturing progress. Before the pandemic, India was a net importer of PPE kits. Amid import bans, and within a span of 2 months, the country became self-reliant for PPE and started exporting the kits. The government should focus on capitalizing this momentum and aggressively set out to be self-reliant. One positive side is that the pandemic has led to different set of growth drivers in the country, like the revival of the health sector, revival of exports, increasing in the global manufacturing index. Other factors are increased economic activity, achieving renewable energy targets, the highest ever foreign exchange reserves, and transformational initiatives announced by the government under the Gati Shakti initiative. However, we must keep in mind that India's GDP has shrunk by an unprecedented 24.4% in the first quarter of the previous financial year, as the entire country was under lockdown. India indeed needs a faster rate of growth to make up for the loss of output in the previous 2 years and lay the foundation for this in the current year itself. We must acknowledge the fact that India needs to grow more than 9% per annum for the next 4 years in order to achieve the 5 trillion economy target. The recovery of the Indian economy in FY22 and beyond totally depends on how steadily household incomes recover and activities in the informal sector and smaller firms normalize. With this context, the Economic Affairs Committee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry is presenting to you the fourth edition of its India Economic Conclave today. The summit is an attempt to deliberate on the current economic realities of the country and the reforms needed in various segments like finance, agriculture, manufacturing, infrastructure, and trade. This conclave also brings forth the topical policy intervention and advocacy issues. This, we felt, is the need of the hour for the chamber to deliberate upon. We have with us very eminent and marquee speakers at this session and for the rest of the day. And I am as eager as all of you to hear their views on the subject. I want to especially thank Sri Sumit Bose, Mentor, Economic Affairs Committee, Bengal Chamber, and former Finance and Revenue Secretary, Government of India, for guiding this conclave and bringing it to the form it is and making it happen. Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending this conclave.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, due to some important government meeting, our guest of honor, Sri David Rashkwina, couldn't join us, but we are playing his video. Kindly hear him out.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here at the Bengal Chamber of Commerce meeting for the conclave for decoding $5 trillion, the roadmap for the Indian economy. I'm honored to be in the presence of Mr. Abraham Stefanos, President of the Bengal Chamber and Managing Director of Tata Steel Downstream Products, Mr. Sumit Bose, Mentor of the Economic Affairs Committee and formerly the Finance and Revenue Secretary of the Government of India, Mr. Tarun Bajaj, Secretary of the Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, and of course, Dr. Ajitawa Ray Chowdhury, Chairperson of the Economic Affairs Committee of the Bengal Chamber, and also Professor of Economics and the former Head and Coordinator of the Center for Advanced Studies at the Department of Economics in Jadavpur University. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. In past years, it has been my privilege to come in person and interact with the members of the Chamber. I hope we will have an opportunity going forward, but for now, my apologies for this virtual presence since COVID and other events have intervened. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had two unprecedented years of challenges and to some extent turmoil, not just in India, but all over the world. All our risk managers would at various points of time have covered in their business continuity plans the epidemic or a pandemic scenario, but never really envisaged that it would happen. Well, it happened. It took all of us by surprise. This is a once in a lifetime, or I devoutly hope once in several lifetimes event, but our risk management, our business continuity, our work from home has worked very well. However, there is no substitute for normal operations. There is a reason for a physically different office with the office infrastructure, with informal contacts, with the repeated human continuity. These make a lot of difference. Are we ready for that now? I think so. We are indeed ready to roll. In India, we have had a very high level of vaccination. There is also a certain level of natural immunity because sadly, of course, many of our fellow citizens caught the disease during this time. But we are now in a position to seize the bull by the horns and move forward towards this $5 trillion economy. I would like to take a moment to appreciate publicly the role of our vaccine makers, the Serum Institute, Bharat Biotech, Biologically, the entire Indian pharma industry, in fact, which has developed over a period of decades and which has achieved a name for itself all over the world. Our frontline medical personnel, the doctors and nurses who bore the brunt of the epidemic and worked literally 24/7 to keep us healthy and well, and the essential services which enabled us to function almost as if things were normal. We in India were very fortunate to have these dedicated people to assist us. Not many other countries had the benefit of manufacturing of vaccine within the country, availability of medicines within the country, availability of trained manpower. So I think we should all consider ourselves extremely fortunate. The question is, where do we go from here? Of course, challenges galore. Effectively, we have lost 2 years. We start on the 1st April 2022, almost exactly where we were on 31st March 2020. So it's as if 2 years of our life have suddenly been removed from the picture. Not just India, This is a question all over the world, and this has been the drastic impact of the virus. The problem is, with our levels of poverty, we cannot afford these 2 lost years. We have to make up for them. Now, this has led to other impacts as well. The drop in GDP resulting from the reduction in economic activity. After all, as you know, where services are more than 55% of the Indian GDP, and services require a face-to-face interface for the better part, and services were the hardest hit during the pandemic. So you had a clear drop in GDP, and that led to a deterioration in a number of ratios covering the fiscal deficit, ratios covering the revenue deficit, debt, and so on. Now, some of these challenges are purely arithmetic, so we don't need to worry about them. This drop in the size of the denominator automatically means an inflation in ratios. So an increase in the denominator will restore that, not a worry. But there are challenges which we need to keep in mind. I'm sure all of you watched the recent union budget with a great deal of interest, and I must compliment the government for an excellent budget. It was well planned, well intentioned. The numbers were extremely believable. The numbers are extremely, I would say, well reasoned and logicked out, and I'm sure we'll be able to meet the targets that the government has laid out. Having said that, if you notice, the revenue deficit stood at 4.7% of GDP in the revised estimates for 2021-22, and are positioned at 3.8% of the budget estimates for 2022-23. The important part here is that the revenue deficit is almost 2/3 of the fiscal deficit. And this is a worry, because the revenue deficit essentially means we are borrowing to pay day-to-day expenses, something which is not sustainable in the long run. You can see what has been the outcome. Today, borrowings, if you see the total inflows of the central government, borrowings or debt flows are almost 35 to 40% of inflows, which means we're coming close to the point where half of our inflows are debt. That is not sustainable. And because the debt is so high, interest payments are almost 20% of our expenses. Now, just take a thought experiment with me. We know that total government debt is headed in the region of about 80% of GDP. I'm rounding it off for convenience. Assume an average maturity of GDP at 20 years. That means every year we need to pay 4% of GDP just on debt repayments, apart from interest payments. So you can see that increasingly, because of the revenue deficit, we are having a situation where a significant part of government expenses are already foreclosed towards debt servicing. So what do we need to do here? Of course, we need to grow the GDP fast, and we need to grow government revenues. Here is where the government initiatives, the productivity-linked incentive schemes, the various incentives to manufacturing in the solar sector, in the electronics sector, the textile sector, all these I'm sure are going to help. It'll take some time. There will be a lag period before the investment happens and starts generating returns, but I'm sure these will be hugely positive towards manufacturing. At the same time, we need to look at government revenues. We need to widen the tax net. We cannot afford a situation where taxes are stagnant at around 9 to 10% of the thing. We need to include, for example, agricultural income. I'm not, of course, suggesting that we tax poor farmers, far from it. But certainly agriculture over actual income over a certain floor limit, let's say 20 lakhs, can come into the tax. And frankly, if you look at the statistics, you'll find that some of our persons enjoying the highest agricultural income happen coincidentally to be industrialists and politicians. So that should be something that is definitely doable. We also need definitely to reduce import duties. We have increased duties quite significantly. A lesson we learned in the 1990s is that our export sector is critically dependent on imported components. When we increase import duties, we are increasing government revenues, no doubt, but we are making Indian industry uncompetitive, both domestically as well as internationally. While there are good reasons to now and then increase import duties, we need to perhaps move to a regime of lower import duties, boosting both competitiveness as well, for that matter, as the export sector. Critically, we have to look at exports. If we are to achieve $5 trillion, then exports become important. If you take a look at exports over the last 3 years, and that includes the unusual year of FY21, of course, merchandise exports were around 330 billion in FY19, 313 billion in FY20, and they dropped to 291 in FY21 because, of course, of the pandemic. Services exports, on the other hand, were very steady at around 206 to 214 billion. So services exports did not really take a hit. Total export revenues of goods as well as services therefore remained steady at around 497 to about 538 billion. Now, I think we should congratulate Indian exporters. They've done an excellent job amid many challenges. The challenge, however, is on the import side, because imports are a significant problem for us. I mentioned the export numbers, but over the same period, imports ranged from $511 billion right up to $640 billion. Now, while India is one of the rare developing countries which runs a surplus on services, but it runs a deficit on merchandise. And the biggest import we have, of course, is petroleum products and other such areas. So if we are to build up, we need to look at exports increase in terms of quality as well as quantity. The largest single export we have from India would be in chemicals, followed by agriculture and other projects, refined petroleum, gems and jewelry, electronics, and so on. Unfortunately, we haven't moved as high up the value curve as we need to. For example, we need to have much more of value-added steel. We need to have much more of value-added electronics, and I'm sure the PLI schemes will help. But there was one very interesting thing which came out in the Economic Survey 2021, published by the Ministry of Finance. So the Economic Survey discussed the low rate of innovation in India and noted that only now has India come to the list of the top 50 innovative countries. We still rank 48 out of 131 countries in innovation. Now, why is this so? The standard explanation is that Indian R&D as a share of our GDP is very low. It's just 0.7%. In fact, if you look at Israel, Israel spends 4.6% of GDP on R&D. South Korea spends 4.5%. Japan spends 3.2%. The United States 2.8%. Germany 3%. Even the UK spends 1.7%. Canada spends 1.6%. Why is India so low at 0.7%? And this is despite a sustained and wide-ranging focus on promoting R&D for many years. Now, the government has done a tremendous role here. Government-funded research, and in India, incidentally, government-funded research in terms of spend on research is as much as 52% of the total, whereas across the world, the norm is around 20%. So the government is doing the heavy lifting here. And one should ask, really, why is the corporate sector not keeping pace? The government research funds focuses mainly on agriculture, space, atomic energy, earth sciences, critical areas, of course, right? But where is Indian business in the R&D area? And this is something we need to look at. Now, of course, there is one explanation, because R&D is often taken in terms of the salaries of research scientists, PhDs. And when you look at purchasing power parity, the figure is not so different because Indian salaries are lower. But despite that, we need to ask the question, are we spending enough on R&D and are we getting value for money? Now, there are more than 4,000 approved R&D establishments in India, the business sector. And you can see the differences in individual companies. In pharma, take Lupin Laboratories. Lupin Laboratories spends 8% of its revenues on R&D. Now, that is an excellent number. In the automotive sector, you have Tata Motors and Mahindras, who spend around 5% of their revenues on R&D, and that is reasonably comparable with majors like Daimler, Volkswagen, and Volvo, reasonably comparable. The sad part is, if you look at the top 2,500 global R&D spenders, 2,500, only 26 of them are Indian. That is just 1%. 1% of the top 2,500 global R&D spenders are Indian. And these are mainly three sectors: pharmaceuticals, automobiles, and software. And interestingly, these are the three sectors where India is globally competitive. So the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is that we need to have other sectors build up their R&D investment. We need to have other sectors realizing that if they want to be globally competitive, then they have to invest in R&D, not as a residual, but as part of a strategic plan. Business sector contribution must rise from the existing less than half to near 70%. We need to generate interest in R&D. We need to have the government looking at additional tax incentives, perhaps a double deduction on R&D spend audited by an approved auditor of the government, like the investment allowance of yesteryears, which would induce Indian companies to go in for R&D expenditure, invest, and thereby build their competitiveness. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what will take us to that 5 trillion economy. Let me stop at this point. I've taken a lot of your time. Once again, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you on this very important subject, and my apologies that I could not be there in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. David Raskina. We're honored that our chief guest has joined us, uh, Sri Tarun Bajaj, Secretary, Department of Revenue, Minister of Finance, Government of India. I would now request our President, Mr. Abraham Stephanos, if he may kindly welcome our chief guest. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Arnab. On behalf of the Bengal Chamber and all the participants in this conclave, I have the pleasure of welcoming Sri Tarun Bajaj, IAS, Secretary, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, as chief guest in this conclave. Welcome, Mr. Bajaj. I will also give a brief introduction. Sri Tarun Bajaj assumed the responsibility of the Secretary, Department of Revenue on 1st March 2021. And prior to that, he was Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance from 1st May 2020. He belongs to the 1988 Haryana cadre of the Indian Administrative Service. He's an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and a postgraduate from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Before joining the Department of Economic Affairs, Sri Bajaj worked as Joint Secretary and Additional Secretary to the Prime Minister from April 2015 to April 2020. He has served as Joint Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs in 2014-15 and as Director and Joint Secretary in the Department of Financial Services from 2006 to 2011. Mr. Bajaj has over 33 years of experience in administration, management, and public policy. And we look forward to drawing on his wealth of knowledge and experience in enriching all of us during this India Economic Conclave 2022. Welcome again, Mr. Tarun Bajaj, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, sir. Now, I would request Sri Sumit Bose, Mentor, Economic Affairs Committee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry and former Finance and Revenue Secretary, Government of India, to kindly deliver your opening address and take the session forward, sir. Over to you, Mr. Bose.
Thank you, Arno. Mr. Abraham Stephanos, President of the Chamber, Mr. Professor Rai Chaudhary, member of this committee, Chairman of this committee, Mr. Bajaj, Revenue Secretary. It's a great pleasure to be at another edition of this conclave. And this time it focuses on the budget and decoding our move towards the 5 trillion economy. It is most appropriate that we have Mr. Tarun Bajaj, the Union Revenue Secretary, as our chief guest. Let me also welcome Tarun to this event. Thank you for joining us. A major highlight of this budget has been the tremendous achievement of the Revenue Department. I think, and we've seen this, you see it across both direct and indirect taxes. Tax revenues have gone up under every head, be it income tax, corporation tax, customs, GST. And you would have seen that the FM, in fact, interrupted her regular reading of the speech to give us all the figure, 1.4 trillion, I think it was, about the figure for January, the collections, the GST collections. So it's a tremendous achievement. And thanks to this achievement, I think the fiscal deficit has been reined in to a considerable extent. So I think it is in this background that we meet today. Yet there are concerns. The fiscal deficit, and in this we must combine both the states and the center, it remains too high for a country like ours. Mr. Asquina, in his recorded address, referred to the revenue deficit being too high, which is a component of the fiscal deficit. The fiscal deficit of the states and center combined, if it remains at these levels and our debt to GDP ratio going up to about 85%, somewhere around that region, and the interest payments going up by almost 40%, these are areas of concern, especially since we also see an inflationary trend and huge government borrowings coming up. In fact, these borrowings have to be managed by the RBI, and there is concern that the RBI is now concentrating on managing the yield curve, especially in times of high inflation. So that is one concern, and I'm sure Tarun will refer to that in what is being done regarding that. The second is obviously the concern about inequality. I mean, we see it all around us. We don't need Oxfam to bring out a report. We are seeing that. In such times when there's high inequality, high inflation, the fact that GST contributes more than 50% of our tax collections, are we giving our citizens a fair regime? I mean, that is a question which looms before us. Employment and other things, of course, it's been written about, it's been talked about. The contribution of indirect taxes and GST to the total is it time that we do a little more to tax the rich? There's been wealth tax and inheritance tax has always been talked about in the revenue department. It's been experimented with. We did have wealth tax, not successfully. So how do we meet these challenges? Because in an unequal society, in an unequal economy, it imposes severe challenges in our move towards building a $5 trillion economy. Again, I congratulate Tarun and the Revenue Department, and I feel proud to have been associated with the department in all that they have done. And since he is here for a short time, I will not carry on any further, but hand over to Tarun for his speech and his address to us and to share his thoughts. I must say that the Bengal Chamber has been striving over the last years to hold such conclaves in which we try to get the views of Government of India and also eminent economists across the country and present these thoughts in a form which reaches large number of people. So Tarun, that's a little background I wanted to give you, and we are all waiting to hear. Over to you.
You have to unmute yourself. Your audio is in mute. You have to unmute that.
Oh, would you have? I hope we have not unmuted him in any manner. No. Yes. Yes, we have you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we have you. Yes.
Okay, you had muted me. I think because it was saying that it was coming that you have been unmuted.
Yes.
Muted or whatever.
Yes.
A very good morning to all of you, and thank you for having me here. So before I utter my few words as opening remarks, let me say I feel a little shy, a little Mr. Sumit Bose, our veteran secretary, is here in front of me, and to speak before him, I feel a little hesitant and shy. I don't know, because we have a lot of respect for him, though I never had the opportunity of working with him, but I've heard so much and so much good things about him. So it's a matter of pride for me that I'm here today when he's speaking to me from the other side. I may also add here that Sir was trying to introduce the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. I recall in 2007 as Joint Secretary Insurance, I've actually visited Kolkata to address the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. So I'm quite aware of
Yes, sir.
this
We are so
chamber.
honored.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that I'm quite aware of the chamber. I'll like to limit myself today and maybe answer more questions so that I can actually address the issues that are being mentioned by some of you. But let me say this, that Mr. Bose would agree with me that in the past and last year, I did a great analysis, a very detailed analysis of the budget speeches since 1950 or something around that. So we found that initially, and it is supposed to be an accounting statement of the government of India, which is given to the parliament and to the people at large, which gives the revenues and expenditures and the deficit and how the deficit would be achieved. But over a period of time, it has become a document of major policy announcements, and all major policy announcements, barring a very few of them, have actually been announced in the budget. And that is why this is becoming such a mega event or a major event in the, not only the fiscal, but in the existence of the government throughout the year. Also, let me say this to you, that after a challenging more than 2 years of COVID, and the last year's budget itself was a big challenge, and what is it that we need to give? And I think a whole lot of reforms were ushered in the last budget. We also had this very high fiscal deficit that Bose sir was mentioning. Last year, we actually, in that budget, we had said that we'll go at 9.5, but fortunately, we ended the year at 9.2. And then we gave a glide path where we are supposed to reach in 25-26 to 4.5%. So that actually gave some degree of comfort to the markets and to the bond yields that the government was committed to its fiscal path. I would say that path actually continues, and we have come down to 6.9%. And if what you have said, if we continue to grow in our revenues, which we'll get to know, the last crop is harvested on 15th of March in the revenue stream. So if that turns out to be good, as it appears to be, because the results of the corporates that are coming are very good. So we might see a 0.1% reduction or a 0.2% reduction from what has been mentioned in the RE figures. So that will be a good achievement. For the next year, we have mentioned a fiscal deficit of 6.4%. But let me clarify as to why it is actually, why we have made it 6.4%, and we had the opportunity of making it much lesser. The first thing is that we have increased our capital expenditure to 7.5 lakh crores from about 5.5 lakh crores, which is an increase of 35%. And actually, it has gone up by 2.2 times in the last 3 years, which is one of the highest in the history of budget making in this country. So, and out of the 7.5 lakhs, we also realized of what happened in the last year and the last to last year is that whenever there is a constraint of finances, the first casualty is the capital expenditure. And it is more so in the states than in the center, because the center is also responsible for the growth and has that uppermost in its mind and carries out those policies which are important to ensure that the wheels of the growth, wheels of the GDP keep growing. But what I realized was in those difficult years in the economic affairs was that as if it was only the responsibility of 2 or 3 departments of the government of India that the GDP was a concern. For the others, it was some people got into a conservative mode. So from the last year, we have started this new trend of providing some money to the states for capital expenditure, which last year was 10,000. For the current year was 10,000 in the budget estimate, has now been increased to 15,000. But then we thought, if we don't spend capital in the states, the last mile infrastructure will not come. The government of India can do national highways, it can do rail, it can do defense, it can do all those kind of things, but there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be done at the state level. And if it doesn't come up, you don't get the complete benefits. The multiplier will not get the real result unless you do it in the states as well. So 1 lakh crores this time, which is a huge amount, is going to the states. Part of it will be free, and part of it would be linked to some reforms by the states, because there is also this effort that the states need to be goaded into making some reforms on urban development, on power reforms, which is very important for the country. So my short point that I was trying to make was 1 lakh crores is almost 0.4% of the GDP. So if the fiscal deficit for the next year is 6.4%, we could have actually closed the budget at 6% if we had not provided for this 80,000 or 85,000 extra that has been provided to the states. So I think it's a conscious decision of the government in the budget making process as a policy that the government intends to ensure that the GDP keeps growing, because that is the most important factor in this whole economics. Because if the GDP grows, which would mean that incomes would grow, which would mean that capacity utilization will be better, which would mean investment would happen. So even the revenues will improve if the GDP grows. If the GDP doesn't grow, the revenues will also not come. So that is an important aspect of the budget that I wanted to leave with you. I just heard a sentence of Mr. David Ruskina on the deficit. So the revenue deficit, if you see this time, is actually coming down much more. So in terms of our expenditure, we are trying to improve on our revenue expenditure so that our revenue deficit actually goes down. And the fiscal deficit, a major part of it is coming on account of the capital expenditure. So that is a message that we would like to give, that the quality of expenditure has been kept in view while framing the budget. On the taxation part, which I should be speaking before I close, that the emphasis on taxation has been that we wanted a stable, a predictable regime. That is why very little tinkering was done. Let me also say this, that on the corporate tax, with the new tax regime having come into place, which reduces the taxes from 30% to 22%, and there are very few, 1 or 2 exemptions that are there in this new regime, that has given some stability, and I think the corporate sector has embraced this new structure with open arms. I say that because we have analyzed the data for 1920, previous year and 2021 assessment year, where we find that 65% of the income of the corporates has actually come into the 22% bracket, and 35% is still in the older one. That is for people whose incomes from business is very low. So they have not come, because with exemptions they are able to they can have a situation where they don't pay any taxes. But my own feeling is that there's a sunset clause for the exemptions. As corporates approach their sunset clause in their corporates, they will come to the new framework, and we should see this 65% actually having grown in the current year and would definitely grow much more in the coming years. So as far as corporate taxes are concerned, there may be a few things that we need to do, but more or less we feel that it is moving in the right direction. And I feel very happy, and more than anybody else, Mr. Bose would feel very happy that even with the reduction of the rates, our corporate taxes have gone up. So that again proves the theory that was when we had reduced the taxes from 90% to lower, that we had said that actually the revenues would go up. So that has been proved. So this year, the corporate tax is growing about 50%. So that is a reflection of that. On the personal income tax, we have come up with a new regime, but I think that is somewhat not very well laid out, because till about 9 lakhs of income, 8 to 9 lakhs of income, it makes no reason for anybody to move to the new tax regime, because in the older tax regime with exemptions, he pays no tax. But in the new tax regime, he has to start paying taxes immediately after 2.5 lakh of his income. So I think there is work in process there. We'll have more data this time. We'll analyze it. And I think if we can set this right, we would be moving in the right direction. The second thing on the personal income taxes that we need to do is that very few people are actually paying taxes to us. I have gone public, and I'm sure a lot of you must have seen today. In fact, my class fellows have sent me a video which has gone viral, which says that 96% of the non-salaried, non-corporates give a return of less than 10 lakhs. So all your small businesses, proprietorship, partnership, professionals, we find that we are not getting enough taxes. So how are we tackling this? I think with the AIS, which you must have seen in the current return filing time, is actually throwing a lot of data at people. So my personal perception or hunch is that this time we would have got better taxes from these people, because we have actually shown them a lot of data. Now, if you buy a car of more than 10 lakhs, we get to know because there's a TDS deduction. If you remit money more than 7 lakhs outside for education or for any other purpose for your children, we get to know, and because there's a TDS there. But we would need to work a lot more and keep telling people that they have to pay taxes. I also say this because we have also now got a provision where we have said if you've got a TDS of 50,000 and you don't file returns, even one return, that means last year if you had a TDS of 50,000 and you did not give your return, then your TDS will double. So last year we had this, if you don't file your return for 2 years, this time we have made it for 1 year. Similarly, we have added the TDS for perks which are given by corporates for their agents or for any other purpose for which they were not showing their income. So we are trying to pick up from TDS, and let me say this, sir, from your time, we have come a little distance that we are trying to now catch taxes while transactions are taking place, rather than only based on incomes that are coming, the income returns that are coming. So 55% of the taxes now we get on under TDS. That also ensures that I get the taxes on a monthly basis, that I'm able to catch people. But still, I would expect more number of people to file returns, because we, again, throwing a data at you that 11 crore people paid taxes to us through the TDS route, but only 7 crore filed returns. And out of that also, a lot of people did not pay any taxes to us. So this is one area. On the capital gains, I've already gone public to say that it's become so complicated. We've got 12 months for equity, we've got 24 months for property, and we've got 36 months for debt. So this doesn't make sense at all. And if I talk to people, they say even property, bring it down from 24 months to 12 months, which logic I cannot understand, because property is not something that you buy and sell on a daily basis. There should be a certain period. So I have requested the industry, I'm requesting the chamber here also, that if you can actually give us some independent view, because I also feel that there is a tax arbitrage. Mr. Sumit Bose just mentioned about inequality. Now, if 10% of tax on long-term capital gains, 15% on short-term capital gains is being levied, is it the right rate? I say this because, again, on an analysis we have done, we have found that people earning more than 15 lakhs and 20 lakhs are making 70 to 75% of this income under capital gains. So the poor people are not getting, the richer are making more money. So these are work in process. We have to handle this in the years to come. And I think it's an important aspect. My direct tax code has also become more complicated, even more complicated since the days you were here. A lot of exemptions, a lot of provisions have come. So I think there's a need for us to have a complete relook of those carve-outs that we do every year. It makes it very complicated to understand, even for the tax experts, not to talk of the ordinary people. Before I close, I just want to mention about the indirect taxes. I think some mention has been made by a lot of experts saying that we are in a process of increasing our duties. This year, I would not plead guilty to that allegation. I would say we have this time done a very, very thorough review of all our customs duty. There are some exemptions that are continuing for 3 decades, 4 decades. So if they were not useful, we have said these exemptions will not apply and the rate will be the tariff rate. The duties are moderate, barring a very few items. The duties are 5%, 7.5%, which are the duties prevalent in the other parts of the country, world also. This is what our experience is. We don't want to increase duties to increase the costs. But in some cases, PLI was being mentioned and the phased manufacturing program that is being mentioned. So we are giving a 4-year glide path where we are saying that we will provide some protection to you for the first 1-2 years, but then you have to become internationally competitive to be on your own legs and fight it out in the market, and we'll bring down the duties. So that path is being very clearly laid down. On a lot of items, we have also reduced duties. For example, I can see gems and jewelry, on certain items of fuels, on certain items of capital goods also. So whatever we cannot manufacture in our country, there's no point of keeping high duties. And to be very frank with you, while we are preparing, I did not ever ask during the preparation of the budget as to what is going to be the revenue from customs. So the revenue from customs is a secondary element. What is more important is a policy direction that we take it from here. Maybe there are some more corrections that we need to make, and in the years we'll do that. But I just wanted to say that. And also our effort has been to ensure that we reduce litigation, that we make it simple, we have less of disputes with the taxpayer, so that whatever taxes we need to get, we should get. The last bit I should say to you, which I've also said it elsewhere, is that we came up with a retrospective taxation abrogation in August of last year. I'm very happy, and as government servants, we are very adept that you may get a legislation from us, but we'll create some problem in the rules that it will never happen. So Mr. Sumit Bose is smiling, so I hope that he's agreeing. So this is what also happened, but in this case, I would like my department and CBDT to take the credit that we actually worked very hard during the framing of the rules. We interacted with the people who were to be affected. We made the rules in such a manner that they could be complied with and complied with fast. So I'm happy to tell you that maybe in this month, we will sort out all those 14 or 15 cases and bury them. That demand itself was about 1,11,000 crores. So that will be very dusted and put aside. So we have come some way. We have a lot of work to do. I accept a lot of criticism that comes outside because there's work to be done, but it is very difficult. For example, I heard the word agriculture tax. I don't know whether media is here or not, but if you say that, there'll be so much of noise and so much of difficulty. It's very easy for us to comment, but very difficult. Only if I'm able to sort out the issues that I mentioned, I think we'll go a long way. Thank you so much. I'll close it here.
Thank you, sir. I would request Mr. Bose to, if you may kindly take the questions, sir, we have sent to you. So you have to unmute yourself.
I can't get the question. So if you Arnab, you read them out.
Okay,
Their
sir.
question.
Okay,
Why don't you read them out? Because I don't see the questions here anywhere.
Okay, sir. So there are a few questions that
you have a few moments, Tarun, for the questions. You have some time for the question. Good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just read them out.
Sir, one you were discussing already, that would PLI scheme contribute to skill development in the country? That is one question that has come up. In what way the budget would enhance consumption and spending in the economy? Another question. And the third one was the capex being the prime focus of the budget. So, conforms to the targets set by the budget, what would be its impact on the informal sector? These are three prime questions. Another, on a lighter note, the question is, um, what are the various ways and means that this budget would make even a marginal impact on reduction of inequality in the country? And the last one, it would be, what would be your advice for R.K. Lakshman's common man on his eternal hope of reduction in income tax in present scenario? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, so on the first part, I didn't clearly get, you said with the PLI, will the skill development also happen?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes,
Is my
sir.
understanding correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I would say the production linked incentive scheme, yes, in case there is, we want manufacturing, India to become a manufacturing hub, skill development is an essential component. And I think the government has come out with some policies in the current budget as well as in the last budget, where the industry, and I think that's a very important part, to make industry part of the skill development efforts. Because if we don't associate with the industry, then sometimes we notice that we are not able to give them the skills that are needed, and when they go to the industry has to reskill them. So in the ITIs and the other places now, there has been some effort to involve the industries in the past, but I take that point that there's a further need to have a real focus here, though the people who are participating in PLI will ensure that they get the skilled manpower, but in case the government, through its skill development, where it is spending a lot of money, is able to assist that, it would definitely help. On consumption and spending, I would say that the very fact that there is emphasis, apart from the succor that would give, say, MG Narega or Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Yojana and those kind of programs that will happen, I would also say that with the capital expenditure, the consumption and spending should continue to happen. And we are actually seeing that. Even if you look at the GST revenues that have come, which I didn't speak about, you spoke about it, sir, that while some bit of GST is also happening because of better compliances, but a lot of it is also happening because of increased formalization, increased consumption, and somewhere a vengeance consumption also. So I feel the budget actually focusing on a somewhat loose fiscal policy has given an emphasis on more spending by the government, and hoping that this year, this coming financial year and the next financial year, the private sector, whose capacity utilization is now inching upwards, will also be able to do more investments. I think this will move the cycle of investments, consumption, and spending. I agree with this comment that the informal sector has been hit much harder than the formal sector due to the pandemic, and we need to take care of it. That is why there are some schemes of revenue expenditure that are trying to take care of the informal sector. But I completely agree, it is a challenge for the government, and we really need to have a look and a focus on them. There are some issues on the employment side which are going on there, some emphasis of the government which is on the employment side. But at the same time, I would also say now that with GST having its impact on all sectors, will also be important for the small industry, for the proprietors also now to fall in place and be part of the formal sector. which is happening in a bit. I may tell you that when we started the GST regime 4 years plus ago, there were about 60 odd lakh, 65 or 68 lakh assessees that we had. Today, that number has gone to 1.3 crores. So that itself shows that there are larger number of people coming. Reduction in inequality is something that is very important, and this actually goes a little this thing when you say reduction in IT, income tax. So there are some articles that are already appearing which say that the ultra rich need to be taxed a little more, and that money should be actually spent for the poor, so that the inequality that is being mentioned by many articles is taken a little care of. So I think reduction in inequality is a major issue. So the government's revenue expenditure and spending is an area which would go towards that. On reduction on income tax, I would say that yes, rationalization is the right word that I'll use rather than just say reduction, because if the reduction has to come, the exemptions have to go. So the rationalization of taxes is a very important aspect. But again, I would say that we have to ensure that my tax base is large before I can give this comfort, or the government can give this comfort of lower taxes to people. Because if the taxes are being paid only by a very minuscule population, proportion of the population, then it becomes that much difficult.
With this, we would request the Chairperson of Economic Affairs Committee, Dr. Ajitabo Rai Chaudhary, and Professor of Economics and former Head of and Coordinator Center of Advanced Studies, Department of Economics, Jadavpur University, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Well, it's a great pleasure. It's a great opportunity to have so many distinguished speakers here for our. It's a signature event for the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and it's a real pleasure for me to give the vote of thanks. Start with Sri Tarun Bajaj, IS Secretary, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance. Lots of hope, lots of clarity in his speech, and I'm quite sure all the industry representatives who are listening to this, they will gain a lot of clarity in the domain of revenue and taxation, etc. So thank you, Mr. Bajaj, for sparing your valuable time to come here. I also thank Mr. David Rasquena, former Managing Director of Indian Exim Bank. He could not be present here, but we got the recorded message. And also, it was a very erudite speech from him, especially the R&D, etc., which is talked about, should be taken care of by the industry, I would say. Thank to Mr. Abraham Stephanas, President of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Managing Director of Tata Steel Downstream Products Limited. He is always a driving force for us. He gives all kinds of inspiration and encouragement to proceed and go ahead with all these events which were taking place in the BCC&I. And finally, Sri Sumit Bose, our mentor of Economic Affairs Committee and the past chairperson of the Economic Affairs Committee of BCC&I and former Finance and Revenue Secretary, Government of India. Mr. Bose, without him, I cannot visualize how the Economic Affairs Committee will be run. He is always there to help me and the committee with his very valuable advice. Thank you, Mr. Bose, for your very valuable contribution and your constant help. And I'm quite sure some of the comments and other things will be, the BCC&I will compile with the help of the Economic Affairs Committee, and we'll send it to Mr. Bajaj, detailed some comments and etc., which might be helpful. And that will help not only the Revenue Department maybe to streamline some of their activities, but it will immensely help the constituents of this Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry in their future. And thank you all again for coming to this e-conclave.
Thank you, sir. With this,
thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you. With this, we conclude the opening session. We'll be coming back again with a very interesting session focusing on manufacturing. Stay tuned with us. We are also thankful to all the audience who were listening to us, our media friends, and also to all our sponsors. With this, we just conclude our opening session. Thank you.